Hey everybody, this is Perch. And one of the types of videos I do that I think a lot of people appreciate or they enjoy, I'm not entirely sure why, and I suspect that at least in some of the cases, people enjoy the videos because it kind of provides them a gotcha moment to people. But I'd like to think, in the glass half full kind of way, that they just like being, getting some data. They like learning about things. And there are these sales numbers videos where I kind of chart how a comic has actually performed and where it is, what's true and what's not true. Because generally, in the comic industry, one of the most puzzling things is how bad the data is and how bad the understanding of the data is. I showed something a couple days ago of Tom Taylor basically had discovered for the first time the Amazon bestseller list, and that his books were on that bestseller list in a bunch of different places, and he was surprised by that. And the fact that he was surprised me because I would be all over that stuff but mainly because I get a royalty. I mean, it's in my financial best interest to know all that. So it's weird to me when people aren't. But again, everybody has a different take, and I actually, while it's weird, if a creator is at peace with themselves and they're creating work and they're not obsessing over the numbers and they're okay and they get the money they get, they're happy in life. I mean, I envy that. That would be wonderful to have that kind of relaxed perspective on things. Very charming. I can never do it, but sounds nice. Uh, but the thing about comic numbers is that it feels like if you really get to the truth of the numbers, there's just you have to actually dig into what people are talking about because you can almost cut the information any way you want to present any picture you want. But to get a full picture, you have to be willing to accept that some things that you like did well and some things you didn't like did well, and conversely, there's some things you may love that are performed poorly, and there's some things that you absolutely hate that perform poorly. But it feels like whenever people look at the numbers, what they really want is that the stuff they like did great and the stuff they hated did poorly. That's the picture they want to hear. And so we go through these circles, and it's not because of these guys. I actually do respect the work that Comicron and the related people do. I think they're trying to provide some insight into everything. I do not agree with the methodology they're using right now to produce their estimates, but that doesn't mean I want them to not do it. Does that make any sense? I think people should be making estimates, and Comicron has gotten beaten up by a number of people lately for their estimates, and I think some of how they're tracking them. But to be fair, Comicron they're showing their math, meaning they are explaining how they're getting the numbers they're getting. Now, we cannot agree with them, and again, I don't agree with the methodology, but I respect the fact that they're trying, and I respect the fact that they're being open and transparent about the math that they're using. They're not trying to trick you. Now, you can get tricked if you decide not to read their explanation of how they're doing what they're doing, but that's not on them. That's on you. If you don't read the instructions, you can't bitch when you don't put it together right. You can take a crack at it, but if your understanding is wrong, that's on you. And one of the dumber parts about kind of, I don't know, last several years is there's this I don't know, this attitude sometimes of people of it's like, I'm not going to listen to any instructions. I'm not going to educate myself in any way. And if I get it wrong, it's your fault. It's like, right? You're just a dumbass in that case. But if you're looking at the comic industry, I think before you get into any kind of debate, one way or another, you have to identify the terms you're talking about. You have to be clear about what type of data you're doing. Because the reality is, the comic industry frequently includes things like the direct market, trade paperbacks, graphic novel sales, the manga, international, crowdfunding, and kids, YA, and scholastic titles. Now, everything I just described is this massive umbrella. It's a huge amount of different things there. And I think if we want to say we're talking about the comic industry and all of the things I just mentioned are part of that comic industry, I think that's fair. If we're saying the comic industry, our definition is sequential art, okay, then all of those things would fit. And I do think that if you're going to say the comic industry can include manga and include some YA but not all YA, then I think you're being dodgy with the numbers. And definitely we've seen that. Basically, I've seen people with in comics, people who work for comics, not really understand the numbers that they're seeing. And so as a result, they'll make wild statements about, that are just massively inaccurate. If we're being just bluntly truthful about the comic industry right now, then the direct market is not faring great. It's not faring as badly as it was during the late 90s. That was definitely a worse time by all definitions of worst time. The direct market is doing better than 2016, 2017, I believe, when there was more of a dip. I can't remember which year that was, but it's stronger than that. However, there have been more things that have entered into our definition of comics, and definitely some things that were very nascent have started to grow. I saw some people talking that digital is on the rise again. And while that's technically a true statement, it is also counting in a bunch of things that we didn't count before. And I think the only way to assess growth is to say, in 2016, we counted comics and we counted North American efforts from this set of publishers. And in 2020, if you're trying to determine if digital sales have grown, you need to use the same set of data. You can't slip in digital efforts from, say, Scholastic, which is what people have done. And so, yeah, digital sales have grown if you count in new things to it, but it has not grown if you're using the same old, same publisher, same data set. I got into an argument with somebody saying, well, you should include the new things because they are new parts of the business. That's true, but then you need to explain that. Because what happens in these arguments around data is people will say things like, hey, the comic business is up. See all you people saying that the comic industry is dying? The comic industry is up. And then they'll be arguing with people who will say, hey, no, it's not. The comic industry is dying. Look, all those numbers are, manga or whatever it happens to be. And the reality is neither of those pictures is correct. This is not a both sides are a little right, or the answer is, honestly in the middle. Truthfully, the honest answer is definitely not in the middle. The honest answer is, neither of those two. It's like when you have one answer that's false and another answer that's false, the truth is not in the middle of those two things. Two false things do not converge on truth in the middle. They're just false. If we're talking about the comic industry as in this big umbrella, counting YA, counting Scholastic, counting manga, counting international, counting all of these things, then the comic industry has grown. It's bigger than it was. But that growth is primarily over a couple things. Number one, and it is definitely number one, the little cartoon dog policeman is just murdering all other comics. Like, it is doing incredibly well. And we are seeing more kids, primarily kids between the ages of about 6, 7, that age, to 12, seem to be buying more sequential art, more comic book style material. What the comic books they're buying are Dogman and things mainly distributed by Scholastic. Scholastic has grown their business and is doing quite well. And their growth, if you just take their growth, accounts for much of the increase in curve of what we're calling the comic industry right now. Now, again, you may be listening to this saying, well, Scholastic is not the comic industry. That's fine. If you want to say it's not, you're welcome to do that. However, I'm just telling you that's how people are counting the numbers today. You can say you object, but it doesn't really matter whether you object or not. That is how people are counting the numbers. If you don't want to count the numbers that way, go for it. Don't. But that is, when you see these kind of bigger stats around comics and what's growing and what's not, it's because they're wrapping in YA. The other thing they're wrapping into is, yes, manga. And manga is definitely doing much better in the US, primarily for one reason, and one reason only. No, it's not because it's not woke or anything else. It's because the manga distribution got its act together and we started getting more books from Japan into bookstores, into places that could make massive orders. Now, you can argue, hey, the reason they're doing that is because it's providing content that people want and it's more appealing than some of the Western comics. Sure. Unfortunately, there's no way to definitively know that for sure because we can't go we haven't gone around and asked everybody, why are you buying this stuff? So we don't know exactly why everybody's buying it, but they are, and that's great. um, but the primary reason why manga sales are up is because big chains, big bookstores, big places that can order lots and lots and lots of comics, or graphic novels in this case, started ordering more manga. Viz and some of these other companies got much better and much more adept at getting these things translated, packaged, and put out in a format that people could buy really large quantities. Now, yes, the bookstores are buying really large quantities because, by and large, they're selling. That's true. But the reason why we've seen the spike in numbers with manga is not just because one day everybody woke up and decided this is the new, this is the hotness, this is the, this is the, these things don't have politics. It's because they have better distribution. That's why, and that is a fact. Again, another argument I was having to somebody, they just wouldn't acknowledge this point. They're like, well, the only reason why the bookstores started buying lots of this stuff is because it was popular. Sort of. That is true, but it's kind of like a chicken and the egg kind of argument. The demand was there because the content and the availability was there, and they marketed it and it sold, and so they ordered more and it sold more, and so that's how it grew. But that's why you're seeing that growth, because manga broke into some place it really wasn't before, and it's doing really well there. And yeah, if you want to use that stat to dunk on the U.S. comic publishers, you're welcome to, because that is something that the U.S. comic publishers have been caught with their pants down to a large extent. Manga has swept in and basically taken a share of the market that the Western comic publishers should have taken, but they were asleep at the wheel. That is on them. But that's if you look at the numbers, it's just really important that before you enter an argument, before you start waving around charts, because I've seen some wildly inaccurate charts, but trying to push every side of this argument, where people take a tiny sliver of data, the kind that supports their side, they hold it up and they say, see, here's the stats, and it ignores the other pieces of this. The comic business is evolving and changing. I'd say that every time. And if we want to understand how, why, and how to take advantage of it, we need to understand the data. It's important. Like I said, sometimes that data is going to validate your beliefs and you're going to feel really good about it. And sometimes it won't. I have the sales analysis for Moon Girl. What does that show? Shows that that's a very successful comic, just not in the direct market. It's a dismal failure there. But again, is that really surprising to you? To anyone? Moon Girl is aimed at a young kids market. Shockingly, it sold very well in a young kids market. Completely unshockingly, it did not sell well in a demographic that is in the late 30s. Who knew? I mean, anyone, everyone knows. Everyone knows. None of that's surprising. But that's the funny part about numbers is, again, you can make the numbers fit any way you want. Oh well. Sales. Hilarious. Fun. Warfare. Thanks for listening.